that lovely introduction. Welcome to Understanding Caregiver Burnout. My name is Katie Muirhead, and I am a regional lead with the Ontario Caregiver Organization. I am so happy to join all of you today to talk a little bit about caregiver burnout. And when I talk about caregiving today, what I'm referring to are essentially people taking care of other people and not getting paid for it. So sometimes we call them family caregivers, care partners. Everyone uses a little bit of a different terminology at times, but that's what I mean when I'm talking about caregivers today. So one thing I wanted to start with is really just identifying the positive aspects of caregiving. So it can be a deeply rewarding experience. My work in the community for the last 20 years as a clinician has helped me understand this, but also my lived experience as a caregiver for people with Alzheimer's or dementia, stroke. I also have caregiving experience supporting people with mental health and addictions challenges, as well as autism spectrum disorders. And I've learned through my lived experience and from talking to lots of different caregivers that there's some really fantastic elements that come with caregiving. You get to spend extra time with your person. You get to spend time doing things that maybe you wouldn't normally do if you weren't providing care for them, building memories and being a part of each other's lives. There's a lot of satisfaction that can come from being a caregiver. If you're a part of the caregiving experience where your person might make some gains or improve or learn something new, it feels really lovely to be a part of that process and know that all of the hard work that you're doing as a caregiver has contributed to the improvement or the betterment of the person you're caring for. And of course, there is a huge power in fulfilling commitments and knowing that, perhaps if you're supporting a person that took care of you growing up, a parent or a grandparent or an older adult, and now you're able to give back a little bit to their lives and knowing that it's sort of come full circle. And of course, above all, the peace and happiness that can come from giving support and taking care of someone. So there are a lot of really lovely and wonderful things about caregiving. And I think it's really important to highlight this at the top of the presentation because we are going to be talking about stress and burnout and some of the more challenging aspects that come with caregiving as well. So I don't want to lose sight of the positive things, but I think it's also important to acknowledge some of the challenges or the impacts that can come with being a caregiver as well. Certainly some of those more common impacts, and this is going to vary depending on your caregiving experience, who you're caring for, the level of care they need, how involved in their care you are. But things like time, travel, those are really common impacts that caregivers experience. For some folks, they're balancing work and caregiving. A large portion of the caregiving population is part of what we call the sandwich generation. So people who maybe have families of their own, but who are also supporting an older adult, a parent, an in-law, an aunt, an uncle, a neighbor, and also their own families. And there's a lot of time that goes into your caregiving space, which takes away from time for yourself and from activities that you might enjoy. Some caregivers don't live with their person. They live in another city or another community or way on the other side of town. And so there can be travel associated with that to get to and from their person or to take them places to their appointments and to the things that their person needs. Of course, if you are providing personal care, things like toileting or dressing, showering, transfers and lifts, that can take a physical toll on caregivers as well, especially if we don't know how to do those tasks properly. We can experience back injuries, neck injuries. Sometimes we're supporting people who may have some behavioral concerns, and there may be some physical implications there as well. What we've learned during the pandemic through something called the Spotlight Report, which is basically a data set that we have, and we do have one for the last several years, understanding the landscape of caregiving. But especially over the pandemic, there's been an impact on caregivers' finances. So some caregivers are having to leave their work or reduce their hours of work. Some caregivers are needing to use their own personal income in order to provide additional care. So maybe they're using publicly funded services, but they're also accessing privately funded PSWs or people to come in and help with homemaking or meal preparation. And especially during the pandemic, we've seen a lot more access to technology and use of technology. And so more and more caregivers are using their incomes or their finances to pay for things to help their person with safety, having bells on the doors, video monitoring, safety equipment, but also for social activities and engagement. So we can talk on platforms like this and spend some time with each other virtually as we're physically distancing. Certainly with caregiving, there can be an impact on your sleep and emotional stress and your mental health. And that's what we're really going to talk a little bit more about today. One of the things that we note in those data sets is that 1 in 5 caregivers are not handling their caregiving situation well. They're not coping very well with their caregiving role. And this is particularly true of individuals who are caring for a person with a mental health and or addictions issue. So there are 3.3 million caregivers in Ontario. There are a lot of you out there that are providing unpaid care. And that looks like a lot of different things. It could be providing care for a person with dementia or Alzheimer's or who's aging or is frail. But we also know that there are people caring for individuals with developmental disabilities or mental health conditions or cancer diagnoses, a wide range of illnesses. And we know that the roles change depending on who you're caring for. And we see the challenge of coping, especially with caregivers who are supporting a person who may have a mental health condition. So today I really want to talk to you about caregiver burnout, but I think it's really important to identify that caregiver stress is something a little bit separate than burnout. Caregiver stress, and sometimes we use stress and burnout interchangeably. We talk about them as the same thing, but I think it's important to identify that they're not the same thing. It kind of happens on a spectrum. And caregiver stress is very common for all of you that are caregivers on the call today. You can probably relate to feeling stressed out about circumstances and things. It is an everyday normal experience. Stress comes and goes. The thing to remember with stress is you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel or the end of the event. So, sometimes stress is associated with a specific circumstance or event. And when that's resolved, then the stress reduces and we kind of go back to what is normal for us. I think it's also important to acknowledge that caregiver stress can be positive or negative. So again, we talk a lot about the negative impacts that caregiving can have, but stress can also come from really positive experiences. So if we think about something like we're transitioning mom to a long-term care facility. She's lived at home for a really long time, and now it's time that she moved to an assisted living or long-term care space. This can be really stress-provoking. We don't understand what's happening. We may have never gone through the process before. There are a lot of questions coming about. Mom is upset. She doesn't know what's going on or what to expect. But it's also a positive experience in that we know that mom is going to be going somewhere where she's going to get more support. She's going to have more social interaction. There's going to be other benefits, perhaps, to being in a long-term care or assisted living type of facility. Once that transition is completed, hopefully it goes well, then that stress can be reduced because now mom is settled in and we can sort of adjust to a new normal. Caregiver burnout is on the other end of that spectrum. So again, stress and burnout are kind of along the same plane or same spectrum, but caregiver burnout is really a state of physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. Caregivers, when they're experiencing this, really struggle to find hope and optimism and that light at the end of the event or the tunnel, right? The thing to look forward to. And caregiver burnout is often thought of as a response to extended or prolonged stressors. So, as those stressors continue to build, there is no respite, there is no relief, there is no break, which we're going to talk about as well today. It builds and builds and builds on itself, and it transforms itself into what we call caregiver burnout. Some of the signs of caregiver burnout. So this, I acknowledge that there's a lot of text on this slide, and hopefully you all can see it okay. And I did that intentionally because it can look different for a lot of different people. And I can't stress this enough that no two experiences are the same. We could both be supporting a person with the same diagnosis in a similar circumstance, but our caregiving experiences are going to be different. Just like some of the signs of burnout are going to be different. We may experience some of these things. We may experience all of these things. We may experience one or two of them. So some of the more common signs that a person is feeling burnt out in their caregiving role is that feeling of hopelessness, withdrawing from activities that you might normally enjoy doing, or engaging with people that you might normally spend time with. I support individuals in our online support groups, and we talk about this a lot, where finding the space and the time to do those things that we used to do. A number of caregivers talk about they used to be outdoors a lot, in their garden a lot, hiking, cycling, socializing outside of pandemic. And when we're starting to experience burnout, we start to reduce those activities because we just don't have the energy. We don't have the enthusiasm. In some cases, we just don't have the time to do those things anymore. We can see some neglect in your own physical and emotional well-being. Though that's a very common sign of burnout, where people say, I know I need to sleep, or no, I haven't eaten yet today, or I'll grab a shower tomorrow. Those are very common things that caregivers can experience. Feeling like it's controlling your life, being impatient or irritable or argumentative with your person. Most people who are caregiving do it out of compassion and out of love for their person. And usually they can support their individual, the person that they're caring for, with that patience and compassion. And when you're feeling burnt out, you start to lose the ability to do that, and you can have that short fuse and respond really irritably. There can be anxiety or depression, difficulty coping with everyday things. And then there's those physical experiences that we can have too if we're feeling burnt out, where we might be having stomach aches or headaches, tension, back aches. We might have a lower resistance to illness. And sometimes, regardless of how much sleep we get, we're always feeling tired. We're always feeling fatigued. We don't have the energy, the get up and go that we used to have. Sometimes there's sleep problems, changes in eating habits. You might gain some weight, you might lose some weight that you don't intentionally plan on losing. So those are some very common signs of caregiver burnout. So as a recap, some key differences between stress and burnout. So stress is oftentimes that shorter term, faster onset event or activity oriented thing that happens. So a transition, an illness, somebody cuts themselves or something happens. I've had a personal story today. I'm sharing, or I'm dog sitting for a family member, and I'm having some difficulties with these dogs, or they're actually not very well right now. And that's causing me some significant stress. But I know that when the time comes and their family returns or their illness resolves, my stress is going to be reduced. With burnout, it's usually, again, that long-term slow onset. Stress is associated with something specifically. Burnout is usually something that grows slowly over time. And another sort of key indicator, I think, that really helps people clue in to whether they're feeling stressed out about something or burning out over something is the level of engagement. So usually if something happens and it's stressful, we go into these hyper engaged activities. I got up, I saw the mess that these dogs made, and I cleaned the mess, and I felt my heart increased, my activity increased. I started problem solving. I started trying to resolve the issue that was causing me stress. In a burnout situation, we often feel disengaged. We all often feel like, oh, this is happening again. I'll get to it later. Or, oh, slowly move through the motions. I'm not going to jump on the solution or start problem solving right away, putting it off. So there's a difference between over-engagement and disengagement. So I have a little activity for those that are following along. And this activity is going to be shared with you once the recording is completed and sent out through email. I've passed this along to the team so they can include this. And what I would love for all of you to do is either if you can print it off or you can have it on your screen. And it's a really lovely checkpoint for folks to check in with themselves. I know for me, especially when I was doing my caregiving, I really struggled with reflecting on how I was doing. Mindfulness was not something I was very good at. I was problem solving and other person focused. And this caregiver quiz that I'm going to go through a little bit today is a really lovely place for you to go and say, okay, where am I at? How am I feeling? And based on the results, that could really prompt you or encourage you to seek additional support if you're not already getting it now. So we're not going to spend too much time going through it, but I do want to go through it a little bit with the group today, just so we can, and those of you that are following along, feel free to score it yourselves. So you can see that the answers are never, sometimes, often, or almost always, and it's a numerical score of 0, 1, 2, or 3. So the questions that are asked in the quiz, I find it difficult to balance work, family, and caregiving responsibilities. A very common concern. Again, that sandwich generation, or if you're caring for multiple people, you're balancing your job, your own family, your own responsibilities, and multiple people. It can get really difficult at times. I have conflicts with my friends, family members, or care recipient. So what we see a lot in some of those more experienced caregivers or caregivers that have been doing this for a long time, sometimes they are more likely to enter into conflict with their person and have some arguments. I worry that I'm not doing as good a job as a caregiver. This is a very common feeling. In my support group 2 weeks ago, I had caregivers talking about this, saying, my situation isn't as bad as yours, or I'm not doing as much as you are. I should be doing more. And it's really not about comparing to other people. It's about doing what you can do and supporting your person the way you can support them, and knowing how to create a circle of care and support around you in order to offset some of those things that maybe you aren't comfortable doing or you aren't able to do. I feel guilty or I feel anxious. Those are two extremely common feelings that caregivers don't like to talk about. So a lot of times in our caregiving space, there is some stigma attached to it. We take on this role lovingly and with enthusiasm. We want to take care of our partners, our spouses, our siblings, our children, whomever it is that we're caring for. And we feel like we should be able to do it all. I should be able to handle all of the things that come at me. And then sometimes something happens and we can't handle it, or we're starting to feel burnt out, or our stress is building over time and we don't feel like we're able to handle it. We start to feel guilty. We start to feel anxious. Those are very common concerns. And we have a program called the SCALE program, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And that program focuses all on caregiver emotions that are really difficult, like grief, anger, resentment, guilt. And if you're struggling with those sorts of things, I would really encourage you to look into some of that work that we've been doing. I feel sad and cry periodically. I have problems with sleep. I experience chronic neck or back pain. I know for me, when I feel stressed, I only start to notice it when I start to see physical symptoms. I may be carrying that stress or that burnout for a period of time, But it's not until I start to have shoulder and neck pain, or for me, I notice when my cuticles around my fingers start to peel, that's when I'm stressed out. And that's a big indicator for me that I'm under some stress. I have tension headaches. So this is the essential bit of the quiz. After you've completed it, there's also a scoring tool that comes with it. And this tool is really a guide to help you decide, do I really need to get additional help? Now, what I will say to all caregivers, regardless of how you're feeling, if you're feeling 100%, if you're feeling at 3%, you should always be looking for support. I believe in early intervention, especially for those that are new to caregiving, to start looking for support systems right away to help prevent some of these experiences of burnout. We're always going to feel stressed out. Some things happen. Things are out of our control, and we are going to have to deal and problem solve. But in order for us to help prevent some of those burnout experiences, we need to start being proactive for our own health and well-being. So if you've scored 0 to 10, you're probably doing okay. And again, it's still great and important to access support, but if you're not feeling like you need it, that's okay. You may not need it right now. 11 to 15, you might want to start looking at additional support and thinking about the things that are causing you stress. You may not be able to change all of them. Sometimes there are things in our caregiving life that just we cannot change. It is the way that it is, but we can be aware of it and work with those feelings and work with those experiences to help manage those stressors. If you're scoring a 16 to 19, you might be experiencing a higher elevated caregiver distress, and your responsibilities could be taking a toll on your physical and emotional health. So at that point, we would really encourage you to start having conversations, if you haven't already, with your family doctor, healthcare professional, family members, friends, joining support groups, looking at different ways of reducing your stress. And if you're scoring 20 and over, you might be experiencing burnout, and we really want you to start protecting your physical and mental health. It's so important for you to start seeking out support at that point. And I'm going to share some of the supports and resources that are available through the Ontario Caregiver organization, but there are also going to be lovely supports available in your local community as well. So these are some of the ways that we would recommend easing caregiver burnout. We say easing caregiver burnout because it's not a quick fix. If you are a long-term caregiver and have been doing this for a long time, you're probably saying, you know what, Katie, this isn't going to go away overnight. And you're absolutely right. It's not. But we can start implementing strategies and tools and techniques to help ease some of that caregiver burnout. So one of the ways of doing that is asking for help. So that could be help from your community, from your healthcare professionals, from those publicly funded services that exist out there, things like Alzheimer's societies or Parkinson's groups or cancer treatment centers or hospices or different organizations that are funded to support, but also asking for help from the people around you, your coworkers, your family, your friends. Sometimes as outsiders looking in, we know, something's happened and we want to come and provide help to this caregiver. And a lot of people go the casserole route. And I joke with my caregivers a lot around, we don't need any more casseroles. We've got a freezer full of lasagnas and all kinds of green beans, and we don't need any more casseroles. But sometimes as caregivers, we need to direct the kind of help that we need. So that could be saying to someone, you know what, brother, I'm really tired. Mom's got a haircut appointment. Can you come and just take her for a haircut and a cup of coffee? Take her out for a couple hours. I'm going to do whatever it is that I need to do, and being specific about asking for that help. Giving yourself permission to take breaks. Again, that stigma comes into play where we feel like we need to be superheroes and we need to do everything. And I got this and I can handle this. And I should be able to do all of this by myself. And in some cases you can't. And that's okay. That doesn't make you a lesser caregiver. It makes you a better caregiver for setting boundaries and limits and understanding what you need in order to continue in your caregiving role. So giving yourself that permission and saying, you know what, I need 10 minutes. I'm not going to clean this up right now. Nothing horrible is going to happen. I need 10 minutes. Or I'm going to spend a little extra time in the morning with my cup of tea on the porch, and I'm going to read my book, or whatever it is that you like to do for yourself. Self-care for some caregivers is a dirty word. Some caregivers that have been doing this for a long time feel that they can't achieve self-care, or the way that we talk about self-care isn't always helpful. I think a lot of times we think of like, oh, take a bubble bath or have a nap or things like that. Self-care can be so different for everyone. I know for me, doing those things isn't generally helpful. For me to sit silently in a bathtub and relax, I don't relax. My brain just keeps going, and it goes and goes and goes and goes, and I get even more amped up. So for me, my self-care is activity, is getting things out of my body. I joke with my support group that, taking a boxing class or going to some of those activities like axe throwing, or there's controlled demolition or things like that, where that's really cathartic for me. So self-care looks different for everyone. Delegate, delegate, delegate. If you can pass along activities or tasks, if somebody else can cut that grass, if somebody else, can help out and socialize, then great, delegate. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help and getting somebody else to support you. If you are working, exploring what family leave or benefits with your employer might exist. Some caregivers have taken short-term leaves of absence because they just can't continue to balance, all of it at the same time. And peer support is a phenomenal resource for caregivers. At the Ontario Caregiver Organization, we offer online support groups, and we also offer individual one-to-one peer support mentorship, or our one-to-one peer support program, where we match a caregiver who has lived experience with somebody who's looking for support. And there's something really wonderful about being in a space with other people who get it, who understand what you're going through, and who've walked in your shoes and have felt the same way that you feel. There may not be solutions to those problems, but sometimes just talking about what's going on and sharing that experience with people is very, very beneficial. And where available, because it's not available everywhere, accessing respite or a break, taking time away, if that's a half a day, an hour, a weekend, whatever that might be, to really recharge that battery. And I use that battery analogy often. So this is another way of looking at yourself and reflecting on, how am I feeling and how am I doing in this grand scheme of stress and burnout? So if we think of ourselves as a rechargeable battery, when we're full, we're ready to go. Get up, attack the day, get things done, can handle all the things that are thrown our way. But every task that we do depletes us, taking mom to 3 appointments in a day, driving all over the community, waking up to a giant mess or a sudden illness. Sometimes, certain activities are more depleting. Maybe it takes more energy to get them transitioned out of bed and into the shower, get them showered, dressed, hair ready. That can really take energy out of your battery. And the lower our battery gets, the less effective we become, right? So if you think about your cell phone or any technology, the lower the battery gets, the less time you have with that thing. So we want to really think about how we can recharge our battery. So yes, there are going to be activities in our day that we have to do. We have to get that person ready. We have to, spend an hour playing cribbage again, even though we've done it 18 times this week. Sometimes we have to answer the phone 30 times a day to talk to our person. Whatever the situation is that's depleting your battery, those are things that are, and oftentimes are not changeable. But we can do things to recharge our battery so that we can continue to do what's right for us, but it's what's also right for our person. So we can really be there to show up for them. So I would really encourage you, if this is something, if you're a visual person like I am, or I use a lot of analogies when I talk to caregivers about their own self-care and managing their health and well-being, this is one of the ones that I go to a lot in thinking, where is my battery at today? How much energy have I already used up? And do I need to plug in and recharge? And whatever that plugging in and recharging is going to be different for every single person. So before I let you go, I would like to review what we offer for caregivers. And so, as I mentioned, there are going to be a number of local organizations or resources or things that are going to be available for your person that you're caring for, but also for you. And one of the ways of finding that is by calling our toll-free helpline. And what I can do is I can send a list of all of these programs and services with some explanations out as well as part of the recording that you'll all get. So you can have this as a resource to keep handy whenever you need it too. So the helpline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it is tailored for caregivers. This is a space where you can call to access information about what's in your local community or what kinds of caregiver resources are available. If you're just not really sure where to go or where to start, this is a really lovely resource available to you. We also have a one-to-one peer support program. As I mentioned earlier, this is where we take a caregiver who's a mentor and they've gone through a lot of training and screening. It's very much like a job interview. And we match them with a person who's looking for support. So that could be, maybe based on diagnosis. So maybe you're looking for another person who's also had experience caring for someone with dementia. Or maybe it's based on relationship. So maybe you really want to talk to somebody who has caregived for their partner, their husband, their wife, their spouse, because that relationship dynamic is a little bit different. So this is a telephone-based support. It's available to everyone. All of these programs are free and accessible to anyone across Ontario. We also have online support groups. So I facilitate a few of those as well as my colleague Hannah. And those are, again, safe spaces where small groups of caregivers can come together and talk about what's going on, get support, access resources, and feel connected to other caregivers and share their experience. Earlier in the talk, I mentioned a program called SCALE. Of course, it's an acronym. Everything is an acronym in our world. It stands for Supporting Caregiver Awareness, Learning, and Empowerment. And basically, this is an 8-week program where we talk about some of the really hard emotions that caregivers face, that guilt, that anger, that resentment, that frustration. And what we do is each week we cover a different topic, give some really practical tools and strategies and some education around all of those things. And then we also offer small group and one-to-one coaching sessions. So if you really want to talk with a registered professional about some of those topics and how it directly applies to your caregiving experience, you can do that. And you can gain some additional support around some of those really difficult emotions that you might be feeling. We also host webinars. Actually, tomorrow we will be hosting one called Caregiver Resiliency. So it ties in really nicely with our talk today. Our webinars and our SCALE is all recorded and available at any time on our YouTube channel. So if you aren't able to make the talk tomorrow or any of the talks that we've held in the past or in future, they'll all be on there for you to review, and you can comment on them and share them or watch them as many times as you like. And those really are because we support a wide range of caregivers across the lifespan, across the province, across different identifications and diagnoses. We really try to create a wide range of education and opportunities for caregivers. Of course, we have lots of toolkits and tip sheets, things that include things like that quiz that I shared earlier, and other strategies and takeaways for caregivers to access. We developed a number of COVID-19 resources as the pandemic grew and evolved. We have a program called Caregiver 101, which is an e-learning. It's an online learning series for caregivers that are new to caregiving, that have never done this before and don't have any idea what to expect. And that we've seen an increase over the pandemic as well of new caregivers. So we have a Caregiver 101 e-learning series. We have podcasts for people who like to access information a little bit differently. And of course, as I mentioned, we support caregivers across the lifespan, and that includes young caregivers. So in Ontario, there are 3.3 million caregivers, as I mentioned. 17% of that are young caregivers, youth 25 and under who are providing care. So it's a pretty big chunk of the caregiving pie. And if we even add 10 years to that, that goes up to 30% of the total caregiver population. There are 35 and under. So we have specialized programs for our youth and for our young caregivers as well through our website, Young Caregivers Connect. So I want to say thank you all for joining me today. This is my contact information, and this will be shared in the email that gets sent out with the recording as well for anyone who would like to get in touch with me. I really appreciate all of you taking the time today to listen to our talk. This is a big conversation about stress and burnout, and certainly it's something that we could spend probably a half a day working on and working through and addressing individual circumstances. But this is just intended to give you a little bit of an introduction into stress and burnout and some strategies and things that you can be doing as a caregiver to help minimize some of that stress or monitor and minimize some of that potential burnout that you might be experiencing. So thank you everyone for joining me today, and please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or want to discuss this topic any further. Thanks so much.